Here.
Oh,
So,
well.
welcome everybody. Bill, thank you for taking time to come out today. Can you hear me okay?
Just barely.
Okay, well,
I have an appointment to get new ears, but
Yes.
unfortunately I only have one that's working. So I apologize if I don't hear your questions. But I probably won't have an answer anyway.
Yeah. Well, as I've gotten to know Bill a little bit, I've come to realize we have a lot in common, and one of them is we're both a little bit hard of hearing, so we're going to speak up to each other at least, and if you see me leaning in, that's why. So,
From one newspaper man to a former newspaper man.
That's right, yeah. Yep, our lives intersect. So I want to start with your longtime family connections to Phippsburg.
Absolutely,
Your family goes back to the early 1800s. I want to know why they ended up in Phippsburg and what kept them here.
I don't know. I never had a chance to ask. But the first relative that I got to know in the family history was my grandfather, Charles F. Perkins. And Charlie was born in the house where I'm living, in the birthing room at 135 Coxhead Road. And he went to the Percy School down at the end of the street. You can see it, it's still there. The Worth family owns it now, and they've fixed it all up. He learned to read, write, and cipher there. Went all the way to the 8th grade, like most of the kids here in Phippsburg. The 8th grade was like the equivalent of a college degree today, because it was a long way to get up to Morse High School. And most of the kids didn't have, they'd have to take the steamboat. So they didn't bother. So Charles F. started the family on the artistry part of our history. He was a pattern maker. Richard, you relate to what a pattern maker was, but he took thin pieces of mahogany that came in the cigar boxes in that era, and he made models, working models out of wood, of people's inventions or various devices. And there wasn't much of a market for that here, so he took the family and he moved to Malden, Massachusetts. And my dad, Everett, was born in Malden and spent most of his life next door in the city of Everett, my hometown, as a police officer. Wanted to be a firefighter, took both exams back in the Depression years. He was driving a streetcar on Boston Elevated Railway, and he took both exams. And the first one that came due and offered him a job was the police. He was disappointed. 40 years later, he'd still say that, I wish the fire had come up first, because he loved fire engines. And he and Gemma hit it off big time here in Phippsburg. And I've got stories about that too. But so this house down here was, I'll be kind and I'll say that it was somewhat in disrepair. And my father got 2 weeks vacation every year, and we would hop in the old 35 Chevy and make the trip up to Cox's Head. My mother and I, they brought me along whether they wanted to or not. The cat got the good seat, and I was sandwiched in between all the luggage and the food in the back seat of the old Chevy. And we made the trip up here, 8 hours. From Everett, Massachusetts, old Route 1, over the hilltops in Topsfield, and through all of the cities and towns and villages along Route 1 on the coast of Maine. And we'd finally got, the big thing for me as a kid, when we finally got there, we stopped in Brunswick. And you know how there's food carts on the Brunswick Common today? There was a food cart there, Tony. I never met Tony, but I loved his hot dogs. And we'd stop there because we wouldn't have eaten in 8 hours, and we'd have a hot dog. And to a 10-year-old, the hot dog was a filet mignon.
Yeah, we did the same thing.
With a little bit of mustard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Then we'd finally get here, and my dad would spend an entire vacation trying to keep the old house from falling down, repairing this, repairing that, climbing on the roof, over and over again. And this went on for years. And his career as a law enforcement officer was really special, but we won't get into that some other time. Finally, he gets to the point where he can retire from the police force and move up here full-time. Well, almost full-time. We didn't let him stay here in the winter. But he'd come up in early spring and go home in early fall, sometimes late fall. And while he was here, he'd sit down there on the piazza and look out to sea. My grandfather did that too. When I was a kid, I'd go out on the platform out there, and my grandfather would be there rocking away in his old rocking chair with a corncob pipe, looking out to sea. And I never knew what he was thinking about. But I kid-wise, I'd go up and I'd say, Gramp, it's a big ship going by out on the horizon. And he'd say, old fisherman going to the east'ard. So I never knew, it could have been the Queen Mary, you know. And they never went to the west'ard. So presumably all of those ships went off and fell into some abyss up to the east'ard. So old Charlie, he said, old fisherman going to the east'ard. And he did magnificent work, wooden models of buildings, ships. I've got just a couple of them at the house, not that many. My son down in Massachusetts has a couple of the big ones, firehouses. Before I get to my father, Charles was a firefighter. Maybe that's where my dad got it from. But we used to have a belt. My son has it now, Bath number 1. On this leather belt. And Charlie was on the steamer number 1 in Bath, Maine. He was a crew member on there. He used to feed coal into the furnace on the steamer. So he's quite a character. And
your dad, I'm sorry, your dad inherited some of his legacy.
Huh?
Your dad inherited some of his artistic legacy.
Yeah, well, that's where Dad got the fire thing from, I'm sure. The old man must have told him war stories about the high school burning down and holding the hose and all that stuff. So we get to Dad. Now he's retired, and he's up here, and he's in seventh heaven. My mom's still alive. She's here with him. Cox's Head, all of the villages up here were quite populated at the time. A lot of old families, some new folks from away that had bought families. They do that now. You guys just bought one. You're from away. You could live here for 100 years. You're from away. So you got to get used to that. You can't use that on your resume. Phippsburg native is beyond. I can't use it. I was born in Massachusetts. So we get up here, and off they go to Everett, Massachusetts, and the old man is retired, and he doesn't have anything to do. And all he's got are his memories and photographs. And my mother, I was an only child. I've moved out. Nobody's around. We don't have grandkids yet. And my mother's talking 20 hours a day because she's bored down there too. And the old man says, well, I'm going to escape. He didn't tell her that. But he went down cellar. A house in Everett, Mass. He went down cellar, and he made his own easel. Some scrap wood down there. He made an easel, and he started painting. And what you see surrounding you here, some of which I had forgotten, it's wonderful to see them again, are his memories of his childhood here at Cox's Head. He and his brother and his mother used to summer here. And they would come down on the Boston boat, the big side-wheeled steamboats and get off at the pier that Reed and Reed destroyed over at Popham. And the relatives would come around on the road because the roads were just two ruts with grass in the middle, and even the main roads were dirt. And the relatives would come around in a hayrack and pick them up at the Popham Wharf and bring them over to Cox's Head, and they'd stay there for the summer. And it was like a magic place for Dad. And much of the magic is what he has committed to hardboard and old doors and even some canvas that you see around you here. They rode the steamboats from Boston, rode the steamboats back to Boston, rode the steamboat, Captain Jim Perkins' steamboat from Popham, the Popham Beach Steamboat Company, Jane Stevens' cousin, Captain Jim, and they'd ride that up to Bath to do the serious shopping if they needed yard goods or stuff that they didn't have here. And so he continued his painting here, and there's a workbench in the garage down at Cox's Head at my house where he put the easel in a place of honor, and he stood there, and the paint, very few of the paintings are on canvas. You'll notice that as you look around at them. They're on hardboard, they're on, I've got one at the house that's on an old cabinet that's about 6 feet long with a towboat going across my sunroom. And he and his brother had a dory, and they went out, they rigged up a sail, and they went out on the Kennebec, and they went to Popham if they wanted to go to the big city. And then they came back and they went fishing, and they went down on the shore. The shore used to be completely overwhelmed, and especially in the spring, with cordwood from the pulp mills upriver. And a lot of the pulp logs would break loose, and they'd float down river with the tide, and they'd end up on the shores down here. And so he and his brother had the assignment of bringing the cordwood up to the house and chopping it up so that their mother could cook on a stove, wood stove. And some of the pictures are pictures of things that he actually witnessed. He and his brother would go up. You could see the steamboat coming in every day from Boston. Boston boats coming, and they'd go out and they'd watch her, and she'd be honking her horn all the way up the river. And then at night, the old house that I'm living in had a staircase that went up to a platform with a dormer window. And he and his brother dragged an old mattress out onto that platform, and they would sleep up there. But before they did, all right, boys, go to bed. And they'd go up there, and they'd get out on that mattress, and they'd look out through the dormer, and by that time, they could hear the whistle blowing. The Boston boat would be coming down, stopping in Bath, and then coming down river to stop at Popham. And they could hear her coming, and they could watch her go by with the lights blinking on her and everything. It was, we got American Cruise Lines now, and when I look at them, I have to believe that they're about the same size as the Boston boats were. Not as pretty, but about the same size. And they go by all the time now. And I think back to the Boston boats when I see them going by.
Did your dad mostly paint back home in Everett, or did he also paint up here in Maine?
Both places. He was pretty classy. He had a studio in Massachusetts, and he had a studio in Phippsburg.
Yep.
Of course, the Phippsburg one was the most important one.
Yep. But he was very prolific.
Huh?
He was very prolific. He produced hundreds of paintings.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did he also paint on the walls of your house?
I don't know who owns the house now. My son, we gave it to my son, the house in Everett, Massachusetts. But in the wintertime, if he ran out of canvas or wood, he would paint on the walls. And of course, the old cellars, And those houses down there, that house was about 100 years old, were whitewashed. So they were beautiful white, nice and clean. They'd get the coal dust off and wash it off. And he started painting on the walls. And I don't know who lives there now. My son told me he thought it was somebody from India that bought it, an immigrant from India. And I wonder what they think as they go down into the basement to check on their furnace during the cold weather, and they look around, and Seguin Light is over there, and there's a towboat going by, and he had a dog when he was a kid, and he painted a beautiful picture of his pet dog. That was on the chimney. And then around the back, and he had one nautical picture of Pond Island Lighthouse and the small lighthouse that used to be out in front of the fort. The steel stanchions are still out there in front of the fort in Honeywell Point. And there was a lighthouse out there, and now it blew away in one of those lovely northeasters we have, and they put the light up on top of the fort. The green light that blinks on top of the fort used to be in a lighthouse out in front of the fort. And he painted all that on the wall. His favorite ship of all time was the tug Seguin. She was here in the river when he was a boy. She was built in 1903. And when he was a kid growing up here and spending summers here, she came and went all the time with barges and docking, sailing ships and everything. So his favorite was, and it got to be mine too, because even when I was growing up here, the Seguin was on the river. Mm-hmm. And I told Bob the other day, I learned the lesson about the speed of light and the speed of sound from my friend the Seguin, the tugboat. Because when she'd come in past the fort, she always saluted the fort, and she'd blow the steam whistle. And if you were out there waiting for her to go by, a puff of steam would go up and you'd see it, and then a split second later, you'd hear the horn. So that the light from the whistle would get to you before the sound from them. And, well,
yeah. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
He painted a lot of boats. Did he also paint landscapes of Phippsburg? Did he paint, quote unquote, inland?
Well, I'll tell you, if you had a cottage or owned a boat during the 1950s and 60s, chances are you've got a painted picture of your cottage or the old family homestead or your sailboat somewhere in your house now. You may have long since gone into a closet somewhere, but he painted for everybody. And he'd take a photograph and he'd quiz the neighbors across the street. Their roof was always a nice blue. You remember, Liz, when it was a blue roof over there on Grandview? Yeah. And he painted it with the blue roof, and it was like a historic thing. And they've got it over in the house there now, And there was a young lady that he took a shine to that was part of the Wright family next door. And they had a sailboat that they used to anchor right out in front of the house on the flats, twin-hulled, so she didn't tip over at low tide. And her name was the Red Wing. She had red sails, and he painted a picture of the Red Wing for the young lady next door and gave it to her. Yeah.
Very, very sweet.
But he was so very, very humble about his paintings. Because he said, I draw pictures and I put colors on them, and, some people are real artists, like Tara here is a real artist. Liz, we've got several people in the audience here today. I'm flattered that you're here because they're real professional artists or amateur artists. I don't know which, but. Huh?
You're saying your dad was one of the first artists she met here. So, your dad was a folk artist. He produced in a fashion that people could relate to, and he painted what he saw and he painted what he felt.
There's a lot of history in his paintings.
Absolutely.
The history of the steamboats, the history of the shipyards, the history of the tugboat fleet at Greenpoint, at Cox's Head. A lot of history, the turn of that century, late 1800s. He wasn't around, but he was around from about, knew what was going on maybe from around 1905. And so the work that he did reflected his memories from his youth and the real life that he saw when he was painting. But as I said, he was real humble.
Yes.
If he knew this was, he's spinning like crazy.
Well,
you see him up there? If he knew this was going on today, he would be so humiliated to think that his paintings, people came to hear you talk about my paintings, you know. Huh? But that was his attitude towards his work. He never really thought that he was good at it because he never had any formal training. You remember WGBH in Boston? They had an artist that used to had a weekly program on teaching people how to paint and shade and all that, and he would watch that faithfully when he was home. And he'd be taking notes.
Early Bob Ross.
Huh?
An early
That's who
Bob
it
Ross.
was.
It was Bob Ross.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. How'd it go, Bob?
I think your dad's better than Bob Ross. Did you inherit artistic inclinations?
A little bit.
Do you paint?
A little bit. A little bit.
Yeah.
You know, if anybody takes one of these paintings home, the paint is done in, you know, the little half-pint cans of enamel. That's the paint that he used, and it mixes quite well. I use it now. I have a model circus on my lawn in the summertime, and I've painted the pictures on the trucks and done some lettering and stuff. But I'm not an artist by any means. A bull artist, but not a painting artist.
All right, so you brought up circus. Let's shift the conversation a little bit to your life. I promise we'll keep this
I don't know.
focused, but-
Everybody's satisfied with Everett C's artwork and old Charlie going to the Easter.
Yeah, you want to ask a question?
We can switch a little bit if you want to the circus, but that'll take about how much time?
No,
you
we'll
got?
keep you focused. There's several things I want to talk to you about, but you mentioned the circus that you put out on your lawn.
Yeah,
So what do you describe what you're talking about?
Well, I loved it from the time I was a kid. One thing that my father loved, and I still do, was a big brass band. I love the music. Forget about violins, forget about cellos, forget about bass, you know. Give me a trombone and a trumpet and a tuba. And I still feel that way. I get to announce the Bath Band in Fort Popham every summer for the PBIA. And I think I talked them into bringing it down there. I know I had it down there twice during the 400. But he loved the music. And at that point, when I was a youngster, that's a long time ago. When I was a youngster, Merle Evans, God bless him, became a friend of mine later in life. Whoever dreamed. But Merle Evans was the band director for the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. And every year, he put out a record that sold pretty good for Decca Records of the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey band playing circus music and marches and stuff like that. And that's really kind of where I caught the bug. We used to bring it down here, and we had one of those wind-up Victrolas, and we'd put it on, and Cox's Head would reverberate with circus music, you know. And I kind of caught the bug. And then when you live in Boston, the only circus that growing up that you ever see is the big one at Boston Garden for a week, and you go in there You know, it's spectacular, but I was working at the Boston Post, daytime copy boy. Mm-hmm. And John Mannion, the editor, said one of my duties was to go to the Old South Meeting House and get the out-of-town newspapers every day, bring them back to the Post city desk, and the assistant city editor would go through them. Well, I'd do the tear sheets where the obituaries were. Mm-hmm. And he'd go through them to see if any prominent people from Phippsburg had died, because we sold a lot of newspapers in Maine. Mm-hmm. And he'd give it to one of the cub reporters to rewrite it. And he'd put it in the next morning's edition of the Boston Post. And so I'd seen the program, and there were pictures of a tent. But when you live in Boston, there are no tents. You know? So I pulled out the Springfield Union. One day only, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, June whatever. The Worcester Telegram, one day only, the next day. The Providence Journal, one day only, the next day. The Manchester Union Leader, one day only, the next day. Portland, Maine, the Press Herald, one day only, the next day, 1953. Mm. That's the last time they played here under canvas. And I said, you know, they can't put on the same show they put on in Boston. It can't be as big. They're moving every day. And so I asked John Mannion, the city editor, I said, can I have Thursday off? I want to go up to Manchester, New Hampshire. He said, what the hell are you doing with that? I said, I'm going up to the circus. He said, I gave you tickets. Didn't you see it at the Garden? I said, it's under a tent. I want to see it under a tent. So that was when I really fell in love. I went up there on an old milk train at 5 o'clock in the morning from North Station with the huffing and puffing old steam engine. We pulled into the rail yard in Manchester, and the 100 railroad cars were lined up, and they were unloading the wagons, and they were unloading the animals. And I walked up to where they were playing and watched them put up the big top from the very first stake going in the ground. And the next day, they tore it all down that night, and they moved to Portland the next day. Well, you weren't there.
Nope.
No, it was 53.
I've seen photos.
You're too young.
Yeah.
But from that day forward, I chased every piece of canvas that ever came into New England. And much to the chagrin of my wife, bless her soul, my daughters loved it and went to the shows with me. My sons could care less. And one of my daughters ended up, she was a canine science person, taught it on a college level, dogs. But the training techniques, she started discussing them with the young man who had the tigers on the Clyde Beatty Circus. And they got to know each other quite well. And he was very interested in her training methods that you'd use for your dog. And next thing I know, she's teaching at Mount Ida. She comes home, she gets a phone call. Chris Allen says, Colleen, my assistant damn near got me killed today. Would you come down and join me as my assistant? And so for the next 14 years, Colleen Perkins, now Colleen Allen, they got married, bred, trained, and presented Royal Bengal Tigers on the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus. And Dad got to go pull wagons, put gates down, clean cages, with all those beautiful animals. I love them dearly, and I miss them.
You're a very proud
so
father.
That's how I got interested in the circus. And the last chapter, I moved up here, and the Historical Society was trying to raise enough money for a second printing of Fair to the Wind. And I saw one over there. That's the second printing. And I had a friend, by that time I had developed friends in the industry, and I had a family who ran the Roberts Brothers Circus, the Earl family. And Betty Earl and I conversed and sent cards back and forth, and I called her in Florida during the winter, and I said, they always played Maine. They played one-day stands up here in Maine. And I said to Betty, I said, would you consider Phippsburg? I don't know if I have a lot to put you on or anything, but I'll go to work on it if you'd consider Phippsburg. And so the first circus to ever play the town of Phippsburg was Roberts Brothers in 1984, and I was responsible for bringing them here. And the president of the Historical Society was Arlene Percy. And Arlene, at that point in time, was dying of cancer. But she still had that great energy that she always showed. And the family has a picture of Arlene riding an elephant, the first elephant that we're aware of to ever visit this town of Phippsburg in 1984.
So
The name of the elephant was Lisa, and she was a little elephant, and she played Lewiston on the Shrine Show the year before last. She was up at the Coliseum.
no kidding.
So they lived for 65 years or so. So Lisa's still around, but Arlene unfortunately isn't.
Well, one of the things I love about this series is the opportunity to talk about history in a sort of a living, tangible way. And I was around Phippsburg in '84. I don't remember the circus. I apologize.
Well, since then, we've had Walker Brothers here twice,
Yeah.
and we've had Zerbini here twice.
Yes.
And Zerbini was supposed to play here this summer, and they gave up on one-day stands because of the difficulty and the expenses involved.
Yep.
And I got a call, about a month ago. They had booked a date here in June, and I was going to, and the booking agent said, bad news, that we just booked a fair in Pennsylvania for that week, and we're not coming to Maine. So there'll be no circus this summer, except the one on my lawn.
Yes. All right. So we're going to open up to questions in a minute, but I wanted to ask you just about your decision to retire to Phippsburg in 2000 and how your life has changed for the better, if it's for the better, coming here and just spending the last 25 years here.
Well, we had a choice. My wife's parents, her adopted parents, built a cottage down in Goose Rocks Beach in Kennebunkport. And they hated the beach. So it's one street back from the beach, and we still have it. I inherited it. Mm-hmm. I'd like to get rid of it. Anybody want to pay $1 million, you can have it. So, or Cocker's Head. And the old man was still alive, and he's up there, and he's looking out to sea. And Kathy, I'm mowing the grass, and Kathy's up on the deck looking over at me. And it was a major decision for us to make where we were going to go. And she said, it was one of those days when diamonds were dancing on Atkins Bay, and the sun was shining, there was a beautiful breeze. All right, Bill, turn that thing off. And I went over, I said, what's up? She said, we're coming here. So Kathy made the decision to come here, but we still have the cottage at Goose Rocks. Her father built it, and she was an adopted child. And the day of her adoption, when it became final, her adopted parents packed her in their car and brought her up to the lot in Kennebunkport, and she helped them. She was a gopher for them as her adoptive father built the cottage that's still there today. So it had a tremendous sentimental value for her, you know. And she knew everything about my heritage. I don't know much. I know Charlie and Everett and the relatives that were my age, but I never go back into that ancestral thing on TV would go broke if they depended on me. But she knew everything about my family. Kathy did. And when you stop to think that she was an adopted child and didn't know who her parents were, she found out in later life that she found her biological mother and two sisters she never knew she had. And they lived in New Mexico, so we had relatives in New Mexico. Wow. They were To me, they were kind of strange, but she grew to love them.
That's a great story. Amazing how that circle continues. So you retired and you waited like 2 minutes to move here, right?
Well, we were selling the house. After we made that decision, we made the decision to sell the house in Saugus, Mass, where we brought up our family. And I had a little Ranger Sport, one of those little pickup trucks, and I had made conservatively 20 trips up here with all of our personal belongings except one mattress from our house in Saugus. And so all of our belongings were up here, and the mattress was there. And that was the year I was the assistant athletic director and assistant coach at Everett High School. And we went and school day and school year in Everett ended on the 18th. And on the 19th, we passed papers on the house in Saugus. And the school year in Saugus, where Kathy was the school nurse, ended on the 20th. So she came home from school on the 20th, came home early because, the last day of school. And we piled into my Ranger Sport and drove to Coxey's Head with one mattress. Unfortunately, the bed was there, so we were able to sleep comfortably that night.
Yeah.
But that was when we came here.
Yeah.
And that was the decision-making process and the logistics of the move.
And you've loved your time here. You're right at home
Well,
here in Phippsburg.
this is where I spent the happiest days of my youth, was here.
Mm-hmm.
World War II, the dive bombing practice from the Naval Air Station. They trained carrier pilots over there. 10-year-old, I'm up there watching them peel off. I was waiting for John Wayne to show up because it was like a Hollywood movie. And there was lots of traffic on the river, tugboats and destroyers. And the Collier, the Berwindale came once a month, around about the 15th. Anybody remember the Berwindale? Oh, you're all young folks. But she ended her career at the coal dock in Bath. She came in with a load of coal and never left. And she was towed out of the river by a tugboat and taken for scrap. But she was like clockwork. The 15th or the 16th or the 17th of the month, she'd come in with a load of coal. Big Collier. Yeah.
All right. So we have about 15 minutes. I want to make sure that's enough time for questions. We do have a microphone, but I'll also help repeat questions so you can hear. But let's start over here.
Yeah, you repeat questions. I
will.
won't hear them unless I yell.
I'm wondering if there's a story about getting indoor plumbing at your house.
Is there a story about getting indoor plumbing at your house?
Oh. Oh. That goes on forever. That goes on forever. Well, there was, when I was a kid up here, I talked about 10 years old and the excitement, there was no electricity. So a yoke with buckets of, Billy, go get me some water, my mother would say. And I'd go down into the field and come up, and that water was ice cold. And it would splash on your legs on the way up, and the mosquitoes had open season because both hands were holding the yoke, And my father put in a pump, a spring down in the field, and it ran up to an expansion tank that's still there in the field, and then it came up over the ledge, and it never quite made it into the house. It went into the garage, and there was a sink and a flush toilet in the garage. But if you had to go, even if it was raining, you had to run over to the garage and go to the bathroom. Yeah. But that was the story of plumbing. Then we finally talked him into, we had to talk him into spending money. That nickel still yells every once in a while down there. He squeezed it so hard. Dad was frugal, to say the least. And we finally talked him, after we got electricity in '47, we talked him into an electric pump. And we talked him later on into sinking an artesian well. and piping it into the house with a real bathroom and a shower. A shower, yeah.
With hot water.
But he was grumpy about that. To the day he died, he was grumpy about spending all that money on that bathroom and that shower.
I imagine some of his frugality is maybe why he painted on boards and such. And
No,
no,
that was a surface of convenience.
yeah, well, yeah.
And what the hell, it wasn't good art anyway. I was just painting pictures of my youth and my memories. And, well, nobody will ever care about them.
Here we are.
No, nobody will ever care about them. I'll just put them on an old piece of hardboard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill,
have a
can you
question right over
talk
here.
about the city of Richmond and your uncle who went to the Arctic?
The city of Richmond. Can you talk about the city of Richmond? Is that right?
Yeah.
And your uncle who went to the Arctic.
Liz Von Yoon, if you don't know
Oh.
Liz and her family, they own Dix Island. And Liz is a local business person, an entertainer of note, and a good friend, thank God. But she wants to know if I know anything about it. There's a picture somewhere, somebody has a picture. Is it you? Of the city of Rockland up on Dix Island, and two guys in a dory rowing by out on the Kennebec. Those two guys are my father and his brother. And they went down to Greenpoint where they kept their dory, and they rowed up there. They heard the commotion and the steam horn blowing, and they rowed up there in the morning, and she was up on the rocks on Dix Island, the city of Rockland. Yeah, and it was toward the end of the steamboat era, and she was floated and towed to Boston, and they broke her up for scrap. She never sailed again after her trip to Dix Island. So I never go to Dix Island in a boat. Yeah.
Do we have some questions from any folks over in the middle? Here we go.
Where exactly was the circus in Phippsburg?
Where was the circus in Phippsburg? Where did you post it?
Right, the school, the playground next to the school. Yeah, it was like it's like moving heaven and earth. If they're coming on a Sunday, you have to get an entertainment license from the Board of Selectmen. And then you go to, and if they reject you, you have to go to the Board of Appeals. I never did. And then you go to the Recreation Commission. They're in charge of the field, and they have to approve the show coming in. And let me see. And you go to the police department for traffic, and you go to the fire department to get a pump to come over and pump water into the trots for the horses and the ponies. So there's a whole little thing that you have to do to get it there, and then they come in and set up the big top on the field, and it fits.
Interesting. Okay.
So just to follow on to that, so is the part you enjoy about coordinating all this, putting together all that, all of the logistics, or is it? Do you want to be a ringmaster? Or like,
Okay.
what's
So the question is, do you enjoy pulling all the logistics together, or would you rather be the ringmaster?
You had to ask, right? I got to be the ringmaster once. A bosom friend of mine, an awfully wonderful human being, a fellow named Jimmy James, who started with the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus when he was a very young man as a clown. And he ended up being the ringmaster for Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers until he died a few years ago. For 35 years. He announced the show, and he had the red tie and tails and the top hat and the whole thing. And I asked him one day, I forget what town, Abington, Massachusetts, one day stand. And I'm sitting next to him. He used to sit down next to the guy that worked the spotlights when the acts were going on. And I said, Jimmy, can I make the announcement? And so he gave me the script, and I made the announcement for intermission. Intermission. Yeah. I used to be able to do it by heart. I can't do it here today, but it was, strawberry cotton candy.
That was
I
good.
could do a pretty good job with it. But I never got to announce the show. I got to announce, what was the last one I had? Zerbini. I got to welcome people to Wiscasset, to the Zerbini Brothers Circus in Wiscasset. They one-day stand. The day after they left Phippsburg, they went to Wiscasset. And I said to Alan, can I announce the show? He said, go for it. And I got to children. I did children of all ages. And I can do a good one of those, too. Children of all ages. And then we go on and on and on.
Great.
Welcome you to the I'm dating myself, but the 19-something edition.
Yep. All right. Let's see. There's one in the back end, then I'll come to you in a second.
Did your father ever sell paintings in his lifetime?
Did your father sell paintings in his lifetime?
No. The answer is no. He gave away, I don't know how many. They emerge every once in a while. Somebody will drop by, or they come to a potluck and they say, I've got one of your father's paintings. And I'll say, really? What's it of? And they'll say, well, he did our cottage, or he gave me one of Pond Island, or whatever. But he sold one, but he didn't sell it. There was a rather affluent couple that he got to know. They came to visit. A lot of people came to visit. They wanted to hear all the old stories about the good old days, whatever. And he got to know this rather affluent couple who lived on Fifth Avenue in New York. And they had a cottage in Popham. And the lady said, Everett, she had a photograph with her, color photograph. And she said, would you paint us a picture of our cottage? We saw one that so-and-so had, and would you do one for us? So he did. And I never saw it. I don't know how it came out. But by the time he finished it, he had moved back for the winter to Everett, and he very carefully crated it up. He would have gone to, what's the name of that company in Bath? And they would have put all that stuff in it to keep it from breaking. And off it went to New York City. And she had offered to pay him, and he absolutely refused it. Oh, I don't do, no, I'm just, it's just my picture. Don't worry about it. And so she sent him a check. And he called me on the phone, and he said, what am I going to do with this check? And I said, Dad, you're running out of paint? How about some canvases? He said, you think I should keep it? I said, yeah, they can afford it. So he cashed the check, and he bought some art supplies with it. And that's the only time he ever got paid for a painting that I'm aware of. And he was very reluctant to take the money.
Interesting. Jill, we have a question down here in the corner with Anne.
I would really love to hear about your circus in your front yard. Can you tell me the materials that you use? And you said you painted it, and so I'm very curious about this circus.
We're curious about the circus in your front yard and what it consists of and how you maintain it. What is it?
One of my boys got a toy truck, one of those like Ertl, Buddy L, or one, got a toy trailer truck. And as he grew up, he didn't want it anymore, and it was sitting down in the cellar in Saugus. And I said, I think they'll fix that up. So I painted it red, white top, and I took a photograph that I had of the Beatty show, and I can't print anymore, but I used to do a lot of printing, and I printed the title on the side of the truck with an elephant. And That was one, the first one. If you come down and visit, there are now 29 of them. And they're decorated in various ways to reflect the Beatty show in the 1980s. And as Kathy made me a nice big top that we put up on the platform, and there's 3 rings, and there's elephants and tigers and all kinds of stuff. You know, and people, you've brought your grandchildren over to see it, but they don't know what it is. It's all gone. The shows are all gone. The last big show to go off the road was Beatty, and that was only 2 years ago. But it died, and the guy died, and went back to Florida, and the trucks are down there getting rusty. So the kids come over and they look at it and they say, that's an amazing. I saw one of those in a children's book. Maybe they saw it on television with an old movie or something, but they really don't know what it is, which is kind of sad for me. You know?
Yeah.
I wish I could still promote it. I wish I could still promote the tented circus in America, but it doesn't exist anymore, except for a few little bitty shows like the ones I bring here. And they can't have exotic animals anymore because all you little old ladies with placards made them get rid of their animals, which was sad because I knew the trainers and I knew the people that loved those animals. And it was really sad.
So I wanted to say, growing up, I used to go to the Boston Garden to watch the circus just about every year. My dad would take our family into
The spectacles, the costumes, the wardrobe, the music, Merle and his voice.
It really was
I
a
got
part
to
of
know-
life.
I got to know Merle well in his life. He went to art school in St. Louis, Missouri, and the student who was next to him in the classroom, with whom he became a lifelong friend, was a cartoonist, was learning a fellow named Walt Disney. And Walt Disney and Merle Evans, the band leader on the Ringling Show, were close personal friends for the rest of their lives. And he used to talk about his days in St. Louis and going to school with Walt. He called him Wally.
All right.
But
Yes.
he became a good friend. He went on the show in 1919, the year that the 2 big shows merged. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey were separate, and they merged in 1919, and he was hired as the bandmaster. And I was in Utica, New York in 1967 for the performance of the Ringling Show, and that was the last performance that he ever played for. He used to play the cornet, lead the band and play the cornet.
All right, we have one more question at least.
Good
Yes.
friend.
Yeah.
Speak up, Rich. One of the great wood carvers.
Yeah, no, go for it. I'll translate for you. Yeah.
I talked about my grandfather with his woodworking, one of the great woodworkers in modern history.
Here we are.
Right there. He
You've
teaches
answered a lot
Latin
of
if you want to hear Latin.
really good questions in a awfully nice way, and I'm afraid that I'm going to give you a hard one.
Uh-oh.
In that the merry-go-rounds and circus wagons and so on originally had a lot of hand-carved detail on them, particularly animals and so on. And I'm wondering whether you had any contact with that sort of thing, even though it was definitely on the way out, if not completely gone, in the era that you're talking about.
Did you hear that?
No.
Okay, so back in the days of merry-go-rounds and the heyday of the circus, there were a lot of hand-carved crafts associated with the shows. And the question, I think, if I recall, is do you have any of that around, and what are your thoughts about that or memories of that?
The answer is no. I will ask a question of you. Have you ever been to Sarasota, Florida, to the
I've never
Ringling
been to
Museum?
Florida.
There is a 1-inch scale model of an old Hagenbeck Wallace circus, and the man who made it, it's all wood, except for the cloth tents. But a 1 inch is a very large model, and the man who made it has an a workshop and an office in the museum down there. And he still is making, he made all the animals, all the wagons, the railroad cars, everything that's inside the big top, he made by hand, woodworking. And if you don't know, Rich is one of the great wood carvers probably in the history of Phippsburg. He lives down in Winnegans. If you remember the entrance to the what the heck was it? Holiday Inn, the restaurant at the Holiday Inn in Bath, the woodworking of the Bounty, the stern of the Bounty that was on the wall as you went into that restaurant was his work. Magnificent. And when they were tearing it down, he managed to salvage it. He's got it at his house down here in Phippsburg. So if you want to see the woodworking.
One slight.
We have some, what I learned setting up the Thursday night talks at the Popham Library was that this community, you want to talk about Phippsburg cares. And I compliment you for what you're doing. It's truly wonderful. It's long overdue. And anything I can do to help, I will. But what I discovered as I researched the town, looking for a new speaker, an author, a painter, an Indian chief, whatever, this town is just loaded with talent, remarkable talent. And most of it is hidden. The people have retired, their careers are over, and they're in a beautiful cottage looking out at Cape Small. And you got to find them somehow. I discovered that we have a world-renowned student of Ernest Hemingway here in town. And she came in and talked about her days or talked about Ernest Hemingway's work. We had somebody else that used to appear regularly who was an expert on Emily Dickinson. And I learned more from those people about great authors, and they were residents here that are out there somewhere on one of those dirt roads or down in West Point, or they're somewhere around this town. And I have a charge for Phippsburg Cares. Go find them.
All right.
Go find them, talk to them, write stories about them, put pictures of them in the periodicals, because they're here. They're here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, last question, right here. She's curious about the cat on the boat in one of your dad's paintings and your dad's relationship with cats.
One of my stories is the position that I held in the family. There was the father, the patriarch. There was the mother, the matriarch. There was the only child. And there was the cat. Not in that order. Huh? I don't remember the black one. He had a Snow White Maine Coon cat. She came before me. She got supper before I did. She got a better seat in the car when we hit to Maine than I did. So he was a cat person. He always had cats. I still do. Yeah, she will be angry with me when I get home because I'm not supposed to leave her alone. She's an old woman.
When I met with Bill to prepare for this talk,
we're running overtime. We've got to get the elephants back in the barn.
That's what I was going to say. I'll just say Bill had a cat on his lap when I met with him.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, Bob. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay,
Dad, thanks you. Kathy, thanks you.
Yes, absolutely. That was great. Good job.
And I'd like to invite anybody who